Hello, everybody, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Thursday, the 4th of January. Yesterday, when I was doing my daily office and saying my prayers out from Common Prayer, Liturgy for Ordinary Radicals, a little paragraph about January 3rd popped up. It says here that Martin Luther, an Augustinian monk and biblical scholar, wrote against the Church's use of indulgences and insisted that salvation is a free gift from God, not achieved through good works. Luther refused to recant his criticism of the Church, saying, "Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise." He was excommunicated by Pope Leo X on January 3rd, 1521, unwittingly becoming the leader of a movement that would later be named the Great Reformation. So, there are a lot of us watching. A lot of those of us who are Christians are probably not Roman Catholic, but I think we're sort of probably more Reformation style folks, or we're at least a lot of you are aware of that, and I'm not going to get into that today. But what I would like to talk about is the question of Reformation. And there's a sort of a sense when we talk about the church that the Reformation was either a really good thing, if you're on this side of if you're not Roman Catholic, you might be thinking, okay, yeah, the Reformation was amazing. It brought new life to the church. It brought back true teaching and all that stuff. If you're Roman Catholic, you might be thinking, no, the Reformation was ridiculous. People need to come back to the true way. I don't want to get into that so much, as I want to think about Reformation and what that word breaks down to. Reformation. And thinking about our world. Just this past Monday, I believe it was, there was an earthquake in Japan. There have been, of course, we're looking at war, like the absolute devastation of Gaza, and something like, well over 1.5 million people displaced, without places to live, no place to work, no place to call home, wondering what their future will look like. We look at people in Ukraine, and even the Russians that are involved. Their world has been turned upside down in the last couple of years. They can never go back to the formation they had before. Everything they have, when things settle down and there becomes a new normal, they will have to reform. They will have to not reform necessarily in reforming something, making it better than it was, but even simply the sense of reforming, coming together and creating a new form because the old one is no longer sustainable. In some cases, like because of war or, what they refer to as acts of God, earthquakes, fires, floods. There are sometimes the conditions of the environment you're in are so completely changed that there would be no way to reform, like to have that formation rebuilt the way it was. You have to reform. So there is a reformation. And I think that we are undergoing a reformation in our own lives as well. The more we have access to things like the internet and instant communication and social media and the implications of that, the more I think that this Reformation idea is really, really something that 400 or 500 years from now, people will look back on us and say they were in a complete Reformation. I think part of the key of a Reformation is that it's very difficult to notice it when you're in the middle of it. When you're in the middle of a difficult time, when you have lost your job and you're figuring out, how am I going to pay the bills? How are we going to keep the mortgage going? How are we going to do all these things? And you're just putting your head down. You're sitting down with your spouse and you're like, okay, so we've got to make the pennies stretch. In Canada's case, the nickels, we don't have pennies anymore. We have to make things go as far as they can. Does that mean we use a food bank? Does that mean that we have a loan, reconsolidate our loans? Does it mean we look for move in with family members or bring people in to live with us and pay rent? All of the different things we do to focus on how do we just get through the next 24 hours or the next year. Could be the next 5 minutes as well. We aren't in a space in that moment where we have the luxury of sitting back and saying, okay, so what can I reflect upon? How can I understand this moment and glean everything we can from it? Because we are in that sort of survival mode. We need to figure out what's happening and we need to do it now. And we need to figure out okay, what needs to happen, and we'll deal with all that extraneous stuff later. Because right now it's all about that hierarchy, right? That, food, shelter, taking care of one another. We'll worry later about whether or not we have pink paint for our little girl's princess bedroom. Not something we can worry about right now. Right now, we're worried about whether our little girl will have a bedroom. Things like that. So whether you're in the midst of chaos and confusion and things being turned upside down, when your world is being reformed, or in the process of your formation falling apart, and hence the need to reform, we probably don't pay that much attention to the actual what is going on. Some people are able to do that, and I'm not one of them. Some people can do that. But for most of us, we're going to be just hunkering down and thinking, okay, how do we get through today? How do we make ends meet? How do we make our mind meet? how do we figure out how to survive today, next week, next month, this year? There's nothing wrong with that. But in time, when things settle down, when we do get our feet underneath us again, we have a place to live, or we have a new job, we've got a new normal, then we often sit back and say, okay, wow, okay, first of all, wow, we survived that. 10 minutes before it happened, I don't think we would have guessed that we could survive it, but we did. We're stronger than we knew. We are more resilient than we realized. We have more resources around us than we acknowledged. But those things come in retrospect, hindsight having been 2020. Those are things that we notice after we have survived whatever it is that's happening. Our world is in turmoil. Our world is in so much flux. There are very, very few people, whether it's from the most elite of the elite, down to the people who are on the very bottom, the homeless, the people who are struggling to know where their next meal is going to come from, let alone whether or not they'll have a warm place to tuck themselves for the night. We are all in a state of what's going to happen next. There's more security for some people in that question than for others, but we're all in the world right now in January of 2024 in that question of what's going to happen next. Given a little bit of time, maybe hopefully not that much time, but given some time, we'll be able to look back and say, oh, wow, did things ever reform? And I think that Martin Luther was the person that was needed at that time, because things had to change. And it wasn't just the church. Everything comes together at the same time. The church, maybe not so much today, but the church in the past has been, if we look at church history, we can usually recognize that what's happening in the church is reflective of things that are happening in the society around the church. How could it not be? Because the church is filled with people who are living society. And we bring that society into the community that is the church. The church in the 1500s was going through upheaval because the world was going through upheaval. People weren't thinking the same way. People were learning a new way of being. People were rising up and saying, wait a minute. More people are being educated. More people learning to read. More people saying, hey, this isn't right. And Martin Luther simply did that for the church, the Roman Catholic Church at that time. And then the resulting things that sort of spun off from that have led to where we are today. But I'm kind of wondering, what might this Reformation we are going through, both in the church, I think, but also in the world, look like in 20 years or 100 or 500 years from now, when historians are looking back and saying, assuming we still have a planet to live on thanks to climate change and our contribution to such, if they're looking back and saying, look at those reformers. Look what they did. It was incredible. It was amazing. Well, we're standing here saying, this is nothing incredible. It's not amazing. It's a pain in the tuchus. And I don't know how to get through tomorrow. And this is what I have to do to hold on to my sanity. So I'm just going to be me. Martin Luther did not wake up that morning and say, I'm going to change the world. He woke up that morning and said, I need to change my world. How are we in history, when we are history, how will historians look back on us and say, look how they changed the world? We have the chance to change the world for the better. We have the chance to be reformers in a world that we really don't have a choice about reforming, but we have a chance to do good work in it, that we might be positive influences on the Reformation that is happening. What do you think? Have a great day. God bless. And I'll see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel for Feel Good Friday.